We've been through a number of controversial topics with conflicts together. Immigration, racism, abortion, sex. Who can forget the reaction to that one? So today we're going to do a topic that everybody can understand. It affects everybody. It's not just a small group. It's non-controversial. Today we're going to talk about death. Ouch. Just the word kind of cringes you. And the readings today lend themselves to this because we're at the end of the liturgical year, and next Sunday will be the last day of the liturgical year. And the readings talk about death in the end times. We are also celebrating today the feast of St. Cecilia, our patron saint, who died for her faith. She was stabbed to death in 280 AD, hence the red signifying her blood. The first reading today talks about the end of time. It's really saying that the end of time is going to be end of time and space, outside of space and time. Curiously enough, that's the same state that the universe was in at the moment of the Big Bang, the singularity, which had no dimensions and no light. It was outside space and time. So it's not surprising that we return to that. And it could be argued that those who have died already are outside space and time and don't have a sense of the passage of time on earth. So that when we die, they see us instantly after they've died. But aside from these theoretical views, the main message of the first reading is that when we die, we don't go out of existence. The Gospel talks about the same subject and points out that we will not know the time or the day when it will happen. And points out that God is not going to come up and sneak up on us, even though we don't know the time of day, and slap us in the back of the head, trying to catch us off guard. God is going to give us some signs. And today I'd like to talk about the fig tree signs. Because the fig tree is a symbol of those signs that God will give us, so that we shouldn't be surprised. It's said that the two inevitable things are death and taxes, either one of which people are looking forward to. But it's strange that we know death is coming, but yet we're still kind of cringe at it. Scientists have discovered and are studying the end-of-life process. The first one to really recognize a pattern in end-of-life was Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, when she noticed in her patients a common trend of near-death stages. The first stage, denial, then anger, then negotiation, then guilt, then acceptance. The first stage, denial, we may get diagnosed with a fatal illness, and we're in denial. We say, well, that's a misdiagnosis. They don't know what they're talking about. Then anger. Why me? Why now? Then the next is negotiation. Well, I can get this fixed if I go to a third world country that has this special treatment. We'll deal with this. And then guilt. It may be guilt for our past sins. It may be guilt because the lifestyle that we led may have led up to this illness. Or we may think of bad theology, and that is God's punishing us, which is not true. And then there's finally acceptance. So this last stage is the most interesting, this acceptance stage. Death and love seem to be in a dance together throughout human history. And why is that? If you go to Tula in Mexico, you'll see an altar where they would conduct human sacrifice, extracting a human heart while the person is still alive. Romeo and Juliet in literature. St. Cecilia. And of course, the ultimate sacrifice of the dance between death and love is Jesus dying cross. Why is that dance taking place? The answer comes in the phrase letting go and letting God. When Jesus came, he demonstrated his immense love for us by dying for us. He would say, no greater love does a man have than to lay down his life for his friends. Or Jesus said to Peter, are you willing to lay down your life for me? The second reading pretty well addresses this. It talks about Jesus' sacrifice on the cross as the ultimate sacrifice. An imam friend of mine challenged that and said, I don't understand Catholic teaching that God had to earn salvation and had to die. And the answer is God didn't have to earn salvation and God didn't have to die. God could have snapped his fingers. God did that to demonstrate to us the immensity of his love. And it led right to the one commandment that he used to summarize all commandments, and that is, love others as I have loved you. Be prepared to put your life down out of love for others. Science has been studying near-death experiences, and they recognize it's real. The estimate is 10%. It varies, but about 10% of those who have had near-death and were brought back will relate their near-death experience and what it was like. The reason that percentage is difficult is because, number one, people don't want to talk about it. They think they'll be thought of as being nuts. And number two, if you don't have that experience, that doesn't mean that God doesn't love you. God seems to know what she's doing. But they actually have a scale to measure the intensity of these experiences called the Grayson scale. And it's in 4 different categories. One is cognitive. In other words, you have a sense that space and time are gone. That's one of the cognitive experiences. Affective, meaning you have a sense of peace. Paranormal means you have a out-of-body experience, perhaps. And transcendent, you might see angels. And scientists know that there are signs, feeling of going through a tunnel, outside space and time feeling, seeing relatives that predeceased you, etc. What's interesting about these scientific observations is they're consistent with the readings. Outside space and time, seeing angels. These out-near-death experiences aren't the only way that God can communicate to us love. It doesn't have to be near-death. It can be a mystical experience. William James, one of the famous American psychiatrists, identified these mystical experiences as having certain characteristics. Language was not adequate to describe them. They're non-cognitive. In other words, you don't know them intellectually. You experience them. They're brief in duration, and there's no way of knowing them totally. They're basically non-volitional. You can't force it. It's a gift. You can't force it. Scientists have studied these things, and they found they can electrically induce an out-of-body experience, but it never has a spiritual component. They've looked at possible involvement of the amygdala, the center of the brain, or the frontal lobes, or even the spinal column, which is, in time, came about before language. But the truth is, science can't grasp this. It's almost like the Heisenberg uncertainty principle in physics. The fact that you try to do this, you can't. And I get most of my philosophy, I have to tell you, from fortune cookies. I I opened this fortune cookie, and it says, if your brain were simple enough for you to know it, you would be too simple to do that. I thought, brilliance out of a fortune cookie. I go back, I Google it, it's a person by the name of P-U-G-H, I don't know who that is, but it captures it. So there is this reluctance to talk about these things. But I think the anecdotal discussions that I'm sure you've read in books, etc., about even my own personal experiences. An atheist converts on his deathbed because he had a vision of heaven. A man's wife, who was a parishioner here, has his wife tell him in the last moment of her life that she saw the angels coming. Signs, greetings. A man's son was diagnosed with polio. He couldn't breathe. He was definitely going to die, because you can't remove the ventilator at that point. And he has a vision of Jesus putting his hand on his shoulder saying, your boy's going to be okay. 10 minutes later, he gets a call from the hospital. The boy has miraculously recovered. In contemplative prayer, I observed two people who relived their near-death experience while they were sitting in front of me. I can assure you, afterlife and God's love are absolutely certain. There's no doubt